Rob Biddulph is a best-selling and multi-award-winning author and illustrator. His first picture book, Blown Away, was published in 2014 and was only the second illustrated book in history to win the Waterstones Children's Book Prize. His subsequent books have been nominated for many industry awards, including the Philip Kate Greenaway Medal for both Grrr and Sunk. He also illustrates for other authors and is the official World Book Day illustrator for 2019-2020. Rob met with Nikki Gamble to share some of his drawings and talk about his current projects.
Rob, I know that before you were a children's book illustrator that you worked in design, magazine design. I'd like to talk a little bit about that first, because I think looking at your books you can see the influence of your previous working life. So tell us a bit about what you used to do.
Yes, in my previous life I was an art director on magazines and newspapers. I started out studying fine art, and that sort of moved across to illustration. And then I thought, at some point somebody told me that you don't really earn any money by being a fine artist. So I thought I need to do something that's a bit more kind of practical. So I switched over to graphic design and studied graphic design at uni. I became very enamoured with typography and, sort of layout design. And I ended up getting a job on a teenage girls magazine called Just 17. And I started working there as a junior designer, doing the layout design and, coming up with ideas for the photography. And I'd always do a little bit of illustration on the side as well. And it was great. I loved it. It was a lovely career to have, and I worked my way up through the ranks to become the art director on Just 17. And then once you're on the conveyor belt kind of within an industry, people move around quite a lot. And I ended up going from there to a style magazine called Sky magazine, a unisex style magazine for slightly older people, sort of late teens, early 20s. And then from there I went to I became the art director of the NME, the music mag, the NME. And I loved working on the NME. It was great. It was like being back at college in lots of ways. But I think I hit sort of 30 and I was thinking, I seemed like the oldest person on the mag by quite a long way by that point. And so I got a job on the Observer newspaper.
Right. Well, you went very serious.
I went from one extreme to the other. But I loved it. I loved the Observer. I'd always read the Guardian and the Observer, so it felt like a sort of spiritual home for me. And it felt very grown up, I will say that. But I was there for sort of 9 or 10 years.
Right.
I was art directing the Observer magazine, and subject matter was amazing. The writers we worked with were like the best in the world. The photographers were incredible. The team were unbelievably efficient and a pleasure to work with, really. And so I had this 20-year odd career in magazines. And
so people will be wondering why you would make a move from that into children's book illustration then. Well, not only illustration but also the writing, and we're going to talk about both of those things.
Right.
So maybe just briefly tell us how that came about.
Well, it's as simple as I've done at art college, way back in art college, I'd done quite a little bit of children's illustration for a couple of kind of modules, a couple of projects. I'd done a bit. And as I said, in my magazine career, I'd always kept up illustration kind of on the side. For whatever magazine I was working for, I would often commission myself to do a few little illustrations here and there. And I was sort of a bit of an illustration kind of chameleon. I would change my style depending on the publication. So, Just 17 was kind of quite vibrant and funky, and then by the time I got to the Observer, it was very much pencil drawings and very beautiful kind of fine art pieces. But I'd always kept up the illustration. And then when I had children, I've got 3 daughters, and when they were younger, we started buying lots of picture books to read to them. Bedtime stories in our house is a big old deal. We still do them, and we started buying lots of picture books, and I sort of had a bit of an epiphany reading these picture books. I would look at something like The Incredible Book-Eating Boy by Oliver Jeffers, and I'd look at that book and I would just think, this is a work of art. It's beautiful. The actual creative endeavour behind it is huge. And I just thought to myself, what a nice thing to do. And I'd done a bit of writing as well throughout my magazine career, here and there, little bits and pieces. And I was all right at writing, but I didn't ever really consider myself a writer. But I tell you what it was. We used to read the Dr. Seuss books a lot in our house. And I really loved reading the rhyming text. My daughter, who was only 2 or 3 at the time, who couldn't really read that well, but she could finish off the sentences because of the rhythms of the rhyme and the potential for humour in the rhyme. was huge, I think. And those Dr. Seuss books, I mean, it's just beautifully done. And I thought, I think I can do that as well. And so I just had a go. I just thought, I'm going to try writing a children's book. And having children of that age, there was always little things that would come up in life that I think, that would make a good little story. So I just started making a note of them.
It's interesting because one of the things that I noticed about your first book, Blown Away, is that it is written in rhyme, and I was quite surprised that you hadn't been asked to write it in prose, because it's so unusual for a debut book to be in rhyme. There are so many things that are cited as being problematic with it, but you managed to get away with it.
I did.
How on earth did that happen?
Well, I'm not really sure. You're totally right. From the outset, I mean, I should start off by saying, to anybody out there who's thinking of writing a picture book themselves, it is very difficult to get published, and I don't think I realised right at the beginning how long it would take me. Had somebody told me at the beginning, it'd take you over 5 years or 4 or 5 years, I think, to get published, then I might have had second thoughts. But fortunately, I didn't. But yes, from the outset, rhyming stories are quite often met with opposition from publishers. The main reason that they cite is for co-editions. So co-editions are like, the foreign editions of your book. They say, it's virtually impossible to translate a rhyming story into a rhyming story in French or Spanish or Japanese or whatever it is. And so, you should write in prose because, it gives foreign publishers more scope to kind of translate your books.
Absolutely.
But for me, because as I mentioned earlier, I didn't really consider myself a writer, the rhyming thing was a bit of a sort of a security blanket for me. It was something to hide behind in a weird way. The mechanic of writing to rhyme felt less exposing. I think if I'd have just written in prose from the outset, I would have felt people would have seen that I couldn't write or something. That's how my brain worked. Whereas if I could work on the rhyme and really perfect it and make sure that it scanned beautifully, and whenever I'm writing, if you were to see me writing in my little writer's shed at the end of the garden, you would see, if you were to look through the window, you'd see me like you'd think I was just talking to myself all the time, because I'm constantly doing the read aloud test. That is the real acid test of a rhyming book. And consequently, these books take me some of the books have taken me a year to write. They take 5 minutes to read. They take me a year to write, and that's because I really concentrate on perfecting the rhyme, making sure it scans beautifully, but also every line moves the story on. And it's very hard to do, but I felt if I can put the time in to do that and get my rhymes perfect, then people can't really criticise my writing. So I was very determined to write in rhyme. And my current agent, it was her, I think, that said to me, she was the first one that said to me, no, write in rhyme, carry on doing it. Because if those foreign publishers don't want to translate it into rhyme, they'll just translate your story into prose. They doesn't have to rhyme in Swedish. And of course, I was like, the penny sort of dropped. She's totally right. It doesn't need to rhyme at all. And hopefully more publishers will sort of start to realise that. I mean, I also think publishers slightly balk at rhyme because it's not, you don't often see a good rhyming story, I think. I mean, lots of stories, even some published stories that I read, I sort of think, that rhyme's so forced. It feels like at the expense of the story sometimes. It's just too forced, whereas a really good rhyme should never really do that. So maybe that's
I'm sure there are going to be lots of teachers who are our main listeners who will thank you for that, because there's nothing worse than reading a book out loud and having to falter
or speed up to
or
fit
speed
it in.
up or put stress where stress really shouldn't be. And it's quite interesting listening to you talking about how each line of the rhyme should actually take the story forward. So you don't just have cotton wool in there padding it out until you can get back on with the story.
I think that's true of any picture book, be it written in prose or rhyme. We've only got, I think it's something like 26, 28 pages really to tell our story. The picture book's usually 32 pages, but you have all the end papers and all the title credits and all that kind of stuff. So it's 24 pages, I think, so it's not much space. And a picture book, we can't really load the pages with copy, so you have to be unbelievably efficient in your storytelling. When I first started writing, I didn't really do my research. I just started writing these stories, and it was only in that process that I realised just how efficient you have to be. And You know, when I first started delivering copy, my editors would have to chop it in half, you know. And when it's written in rhyme, I think you have to be even more efficient. Every single word counts.
Fantastic.
And the most satisfying part of my job is when I get a rhyme to work. When that whole story is flowing nicely and it fits the pages. And I've had to lose lots of really good stuff, you know. Often along the way I'll have a little couplet that I'm in love with at the beginning and it doesn't make the final cut. But when you get it to work in rhyme, oh my God, it's the most satisfying thing ever, you know.
I wanted to talk a little bit about how your design background has influenced the visuals in your books. To me, I can see a designer in there. I can see it with the colour, I think, and the way that you use your colour palette, which tells the story every time you turn a page, really. Layout and typography, all of those things scream designer at me. Tell us, in your view, how the design work has influenced the picture book making.
Actually, sometimes I'll say to my wife, "Oh, this is I'm loving this job so much. Why didn't I start doing this? 10 years ago, 20 years ago." And I don't think I could have, because my design background in magazines, especially, has stood me in such good stead on many levels. For a start, the key thing is the pacing. So when you're designing a magazine feature, particularly on something like The Observer, when you might be running a 3,000 or 4,000 word piece over 10 pages, 12 pages, your sole objective on a magazine is to get your reader to the end of the copy. So there's lots of devices in magazines that try and persuade you to read that long feature. So you'll have a engaging headline, something called a stand first, or a sell, which is the little bit of copy underneath a headline, which is basically trying to persuade you to, devote some of your time to read this feature. You have pull quotes all the way through that, if you're just flicking through, one of them might stop you and arrest you. But the other thing is something called pacing. So you might start your feature with a great big photograph across a double page spread, but then the next page you will want to do something a bit busier with lots of bitty sort of aspects, lots of pictures and picture captions and quotes. Then you might want to slow it down again and just have a nice big picture. Blah, blah, blah. And so it's like all that kind of that rise and fall, the kind of the speed at which a magazine feature is designed is really similar to the speed at which a picture book layout should be designed. So if you have a look through my books, you'll see that I often have a big double page spread illustration with not much going on. The picture is doing most of the work, maybe a little line of copy, and that'll be followed by a page which has got maybe 4 little scenes going on in it, just to kind of like get that sort of ebb and flow going on. So that's definitely one way that a magazine career has stood me in good stead. Every single book I will still draw, like I used to do with magazines. I'll draw what we used to call a flat plan, which is like basically the book in little thumbnail sketches of every single spread in the book. I will draw everything out and sort of work out the pacing there, very much using my magazine background. Typographically, I guess there's
the typography is just brilliant. Now, I thought that that was found typography that was scanned into the computer, but I don't think I'm right there, am I?
I hand draw my type. I do a hand draw. Certainly all the display type that's in the books. It's all based on typefaces that I've grown to, I do sound, I'm a bit of a type geek, I have to say. You have your favourite typefaces that I've kind of built up over the years, and they all are appearing in my books. But I like to hand draw the type. I want it to be slightly imperfect. I think in the world of picture books, that's a really important aspect. I think children, even though I produce my final artwork digitally, it is all hand drawn, just with a digital pen, on a screen, not in a book. But I still want it to feel hand drawn, because I think children like to see the artistry and the craft behind those illustrations. So most of the illustrators that are working in children's books today will work digitally, but everyone's trying to make it not look digital, if that makes sense.
It is interesting. We were talking about the joys that can come from mistakes if you're working non-digitally, and in a way what you're saying is trying to find the process that allows you to keep some of those. They're not really mistakes, are they? They're more
happy accidents. Yes. You really do want to keep those in, and you do still get them working digitally, and I do deliberately keep little random elements in. You're using a digital paintbrush which replicates a watercolour brush, and the designers are very clever at Photoshop or wherever these places are. They build in certain random elements when the brush hits the screen. the pixels sort of splatter away from the brush. Very clever. And yeah, you do try and keep those elements in.
Fantastic.
And colour palette wise, you mentioned the colour palette. So when I was designing a feature on a magazine, what you would do is you would get your beautiful photography by, I don't know, Stephen Klein or David LaChapelle, and the colours you would use in the type in your feature you would take from that photograph. And that would become your colour palette for the entire feature, maybe 2 or 3 colours. And it's the same with the picture books. I mean, some of my picture books now have got much wider colour palettes, particularly the Dinosaur Juniors books, because we're aiming them at younger kids and we really want an explosion of colour on the pages. But something like Blown Away really was only whites and blues with a flash of orange for the kite, for the main character. And there's a point in that book where the Antarctic characters, they end up in the jungle, and there's a moment where you turn the page to this jungle scene and suddenly the page is full of greens.
Quite Rousseau-esque.
Unbelievably Rousseau-esque, because that was my inspiration for that spread. And if you look very closely, you will actually see some of the plants are direct lifts from my versions of the Rousseau plants. So good spot. But yeah, so the colour does a lot of work in that book actually. And again, I think it's just a product of me thinking how to tell a story visually in a magazine or a newspaper is exactly the same process as how to tell a story in a picture book for a 5-year-old child.
So interesting. You brought your sketchbook along with you, and I love looking in artist sketchbooks.
Yeah,
it's probably one of the neatest that I've ever seen.
Wow.
Yeah, so
it's got its moments. Yeah,
I want to talk to you a little bit about character development, and I think we can see some of that here, can't we? Both in the sketchbook and you've got it on the screen.
Yeah, scans.
So how does it start?
Well, for me, I think usually it's a one-line idea for a story. So, for example, with my book Grr, it's always hard to say that, but it's just called Grr, and it's all about a bear who loses his growl. And I'll say how the entire story came about. I was listening to Magic FM, that radio station, Magic FM, easy listening, and a song came on by a band called Everything But the Girl. And I thought, Everything But the Grr would be a really good name for a children's book. What could that story be about? I know, it'd be about a bear who is brilliant at being a bear in every aspect but the growl.
Yeah.
And then that became a bear who loses his growl. And that I started with that story idea. Then I started on the main character. So I started drawing loads and loads of bears in my sketchbook, and I'd literally fill the sketchbook with ideas, and then the way
he's a very elongated bear.
He's very elongated bear.
And
he is
what kind of effect does that have on how we respond to him and his character, do you think?
Well, I sort of thought that by elongating his body, it made him seem slightly more noble for some reason.
Yeah.
And also there was a slight comical aspect. But then what you do, you sort of start sketching that in various positions and see if it's kind of got the variety that you're going to need for the story. And what you do, I'm literally, my sketchbook is a bit of a brain dump, so you just literally draw, and then what I always do is I put it down for a few hours, go and have some dinner and play with the kids, put the kids to bed, and then have another look, and your brain sort of looks at it freshly, and then I will sort of go through and I'll sort of tick one, I'll tick the nose of one or the bit of the, and you sort of get this amalgamation of the perfect kind of bear character in the end. And it's the same with any character, really, be it an owl or a raccoon or whatever it is you're doing. And then once I'm sort of happy, roughly, with that, then I will start thinking about maybe I'll sort of, in the process of drawing that, you're sort of always thinking about how the story might work in the back of your mind. And I will always get a picture of one of the set-piece scenes. So then I'll put this character that I've come up with into one of the set-piece scenes.
Right. So you've got this big landscape,
forest landscape with a growl going across it. Then I'll start. Even at that point, you still might change your mind. At the point where I start taking it into the digital realm, into digital artwork, I'll start drawing different kinds of bears there. Try
and
different colours, experiment with
colour.
Colours and clothing and outfits and that kind of thing. And
what a huge difference it makes whether you've got a sort of grey bear and this
really
dark
it really does.
brown.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. And if you decide to clothe them or not, and that all sort of informs your thinking in terms of the story as well.
You've got a bear here in a sort of black polo neck, one in a tracksuit top, and then a bear that I recognise with a running band round the top of his head
and
a medal.
Well, that's when I decided this bear who was good at everything would actually be a sort of an Olympic champion bear. And then I thought one of the events could be like the loud growl. Then I thought somebody will have stolen his growl, and that's the sort. Then you sort of, but it's all in the process of doing all these drawings that the story sort of then starts to filter through. So when people say what comes first, it's very hard to say. They sort of come through together at the same time.
A toing and froing.
Yeah, and but then you get to a point where you start to think about the colour palette. Everything just sort of suddenly starts to come together, and then you realise that you've got an identity for an entire book in one illustration. And then it's quite easy to sort of extrapolate the colour palette from that illustration and the various kind of graphic signifiers and flood it throughout the rest of your book. Then once I've got that sorted, that's when I sort of put my pencils down and I go away and I start concentrating on the writing and the plot, and getting the rhyme to fit the plot first of all, and then getting the copy to fit the layout. And that's when the real kind of hardcore editing has to happen.
Yeah. The publisher, it's usually an art, as you were once, an art director, to help put these books together, but presumably you don't need much of that.
To a certain extent, I think I'm quite unusual in that I do the entire layout for the book myself, at least initially. But I do have, at HarperCollins, we have a brilliant art department, and they are so important in the process to me because they're a sounding board. And apart from anything else, every now and then they'll give me, no, quite often in fact, they'll just say, well, have you just thought about tweaking this bit here, or maybe taking that page and putting that on a spread and doing and moving things around, not a huge amount, but they're always right, basically. Because the thing is, I know quite a lot about design, I know a lot about typography and colour palettes, but I'm relatively new to this world. So I would be an idiot to ignore somebody who's been working doing these kind of things for such a long time. And I often worry about treading on people's toes at my publisher, and I say to them, look, I'm really, you have to speak up if I'm doing so, but they always say, no, we would.
So our listeners will be really familiar with Blown Away, Odd Dog Out, Kevin.
Yes.
But we have a new series,
we do,
and you're in the
Juniors.
Second book, Dinosaur Juniors, and they look quite pared back compared to your other books.
Yes.
You've already said the colour palette is a little different, and also the amount of text. So tell us a bit about this new series.
Okay. We've made a conscious decision with my editors at Harper. We decided we wanted to have a go at producing a series, first of all, so it's my first series, but also we wanted this series to target slightly younger kids, so maybe preschool children, reception children, whereas my other books, they usually key stage 1, but they do, you do get kids 8-9 years old reading those books as well. And I always think with picture books anyway, there shouldn't really be age limits, but because we were targeting slightly younger children, we wanted to have slightly simpler story arcs, first of all, so fewer words. The pictures I wanted to be a bit bolder and a bit sort of flatter, so and very arresting colours. So these are very kind of, if you see them, they're very bright kind of books, and lots
they
of
do pop. They're in the same tonal range, aren't they? They're quite saturated,
very saturated, full on, full colours, not too many kind of pastel shades. And we also wanted to. So we got a series of books with all these dinosaur characters. I think there's 10 dinosaur characters, and we wanted each story to concern itself with an issue that a young child might be facing in their life. So something that's very, very relatable. And I know most picture books want to do that in some capacity, but this, we wanted it to be fairly overt. So for example, the first book is called Happy Hatch Day, and that's the kind of, it had to serve, that's the most difficult one to write, because I've already said we don't have much space in a picture book, and then when you're paring down the copy as well, you've got even less room to kind of explain what's going on. And with that book, we had to introduce these characters, sort of explain a little bit about the premise of the series in a kind of subtle way, and also get our message across that we wanted to get across. So this one was all about these dinosaurs were all hatching out of their eggs. Actually, no, there's 9 dinosaurs, isn't there? Yeah, because there's the ninth egg doesn't hatch till a week after all of the others, by which point they've all made friends already and they're having fun together. And this last dinosaur, who's called Greg, named after one of my friends. That's another nice thing you can do with picture books.
Oh.
Yeah, I've got lots of my friends in these stories.
What a nice gift.
Yeah, it's a lovely thing to be able to do. So this last dinosaur then has to kind of catch up with all the other dinosaurs and try and make friends with them. And at various points in the story, he sort of feels a bit lonely and a bit kind of left out. So that's the kind of message we were trying to tackle with this story. And of course, it's got a lovely happy ending. And then the second book is called Give Peas a Chance, which I'm so pleased they let me use that pun on the book. But it's all about a dinosaur who doesn't like eating his vegetables, so it's all tackling these kind of issues that the children hopefully will overcome in their real life too. And this book hopefully is a little bit of a tool for the parents of these young kids. And my third book
She's a female dinosaur, isn't she?
I have
the peas one.
The peas one is called Nancy. Yeah. That's another big thing for me.
I noticed that also in Odd Dog Out, because actually it's quite unusual.
Yeah.
In most picture books, that would have been a male dog.
Yeah.
So it strikes you, if you're used to reading a lot of picture books, that you'd made that female.
And I made a very deliberate choice. I mean, I'm a father of 3 daughters for a start. And I was very aware when I first came into this industry that you're totally right. There's not that many female protagonists in picture books. If you see a little drawing of a little teddy bear or something, the default setting is to say, "Oh, isn't he lovely?"
Absolutely.
And it's almost, I remember pushing my daughters around in their pram, and people would stop in the street and say, "Oh, he's so cute, isn't he?" And you're like, just because we don't swathe her in pink, you shouldn't assume that this. So with with Blown Away, I don't at any point in that book say he when I'm referring to Penguin Blue, the lead character. Actually, I do sort of think of him as a he. I think in my head.
Yes, I think I probably do as well.
But that's interesting, isn't it, that we both do that? Because actually I was very conscious writing that book not to assign a gender to that character. But then by the time I got to Odd Dog Out, it was a very deliberate decision right from the beginning that she was going to be a female dog, and she wasn't going to look particularly female. She was just going to look. She just got a rainbow scarf on, which again was another little nod to the LGBT movement as well, because the story, for those that haven't read it, is all about not fitting in and initially feeling uncomfortable about that and trying to change yourself or change your environment in order that you do fit in, and then ultimately it's all about realising that being yourself is the most important thing, and there's nothing wrong with being who you are, So we had lots of little signifiers, so the rainbow scarf. But I really wanted that character to be a female. And since it's been... Because lots of people... I think what it is, the thinking behind it is that boys won't really want to read a book about a female character, whereas girls are quite happy to read books about male characters.
So we have to change it.
We've got to change the patriarchy. We've got to change it. And what's interesting is that with Odd Dog Out, I've got as many boys writing me letters as girls, if not more boys. They could not care less that she's a female, which is I'm so happy about. And with the dinosaurs, I split it right down the middle, male and female characters. The first book focused on a male character, the second one a female character. The third book, which is going to be called Wide Awake, is all about twin dinosaurs. So we've got one boy and one girl, and they can't get to sleep in this book, you see. So, but there's something that I think there is a responsibility on people who write picture books, in that we are often people's first window into the world of reading, and in many ways the world of ideas. I can remember the first picture books that I ever read. And I think if you can give a positive message, then why not? You should do.
Just a couple more questions, Rob. I would be really interested to know, you talked about your childhood reading there, just in passing. With regards to your artwork, who've been the major inspirations and influences on how that's developed?
Well, the main one that I often cite is Richard Scarry. We had every Richard Scarry book. It's my absolute favourite. I bought them all for my children too, and I would just spend hours and hours and hours looking at those illustrations. Because with a picture book, the words and the pictures should do slightly different jobs. They should sort of complement each other. They shouldn't really be doing the same thing necessarily. And with his books, I think that was exactly right. The picture would be there'd be so much detail to look at. They'd be doing a totally different job to the actual kind of the through story that ran through. And that's what I try and do in my books. Also, you're very aware, writing picture books, that your readers are going to be reading these. I mean, lots of parents come up to me and say, I've read Blown Away for the last 10 nights in a row. And first of all, I feel the need to, I'm so sorry, but they say, no, we love it, because on day 6 we spotted something in this illustration. We didn't see the little monkey who was hiding behind the... You know, so you have to put these layers into your drawings and a richness of detail so that people can spot things on the 10th reading, the 11th reading that they've never spotted before. Because children, particularly at that age, they take everything in. You know, I'll sit there with my daughter and she has to look at every single thing on the page before I'm allowed to turn the page. And so there's a richness in the visual language that you really have to put into your picture books. And Richard Scarry was the absolute master for me. And then people like lots of varied artworks. I've already mentioned Oliver Jeffers, who I think was the one contemporary illustrator that made me think of the medium as an art form. Yeah, I just thought, oh my gosh, this guy, he's a genius. You know, he's producing absolutely beautiful artwork. Because the other thing we have to do is we have to appeal to parents, because they're the ones who might pick the book up off the shelves or order it online or whatever it is they do. Your book has to kind of slightly fit into their criteria of what's going to look good in the child's bedroom. But then it's the child who asks for the repeat reading. So you're having to appeal to two very different kind of markets in a way. And I think Oliver's is amazing. He straddles the boundaries perfectly. But then I love Judith Kerr. I love Shirley Hughes, Tony Ungerer, Anthony Brown. I mean, the Anthony Brown books are amazing. They're another one for the detail and the sheer technical ability that he has got. But there's lots of... I tell you something that I do now. I try... When I first started, I used to spend... When I was working at The Guardian, I would spend every lunchtime down in the bookshop in St Pancras Station, pouring through all the picture books, looking at everything. And I really don't do that very much anymore, because I tell you why, I've developed a style somehow. By fluke, you sort of land on a style that is your own style, recognisable as your own style, and that's really not very easy to do. I mean, even now, when I do look at the bookshelves, you see a lot of what I call Me Too books, which are very lovely books by very, very talented artists, but you'll think, oh, that person really likes Oliver Jeffers, or, you know, that person really likes, you know, Chris Walter, whoever it is, you know. Lots of people who can't help but be influenced by other people's style. And I think we're all susceptible to that. You know, there's a real danger in that. So I sort of have made a conscious decision to not spend hours poring over other people's books, particularly my contemporaries, because I don't want to. Yeah. I don't want to be too influenced. Does that make it sounds strange?
I completely understand that.
Yeah.
I do. Yes. Yeah. Just one last brief question, actually. I know that you have been selected to be the World Book Day illustrator.
I have.
For 2 years. What does it involve?
Yeah, so they said to me, can you come up with a campaign? They wanted it to be a kind of character-led campaign, because Jim Field, he did the job last year, and he came up with these little book characters that kind of populated the website and, you know, would appear on all the things that went out to schools and things, and they were lovely, and it was a big success, I gather, and so they wanted me to come up with some kind of characters. So we came up, I say we, because my wife, you know, I think my wife was actually... It was her idea to come up with little bookmark characters that I've sort of designed. In a similar way to my Odd Dog Out characters, I sort of gave them all different outfits and different personalities. And once I'd done that, I started sort of coming up with little poster ideas, and which sort of pertains to my previous career on the newspapers as well. We used to do lots of kind of ads for the Guardian and whatnot, and the Observer, and, you know, I quite like that side of things too. And so I sort of went back to Kirsten at World Book Day and Nikki, who's the designer there, and sort of had this whole kind of tranche of this ad campaign. And of course, once we came up with the bookmark characters, we thought we can actually make physical bookmarks to give out to the kids of these characters, and, you know, on the back of those bookmarks we can give lots of book recommendations. So like on the back we've got one character who's a bit like a David Bowie, Ziggy Stardust type bookmark, so we can give kids this bookmark that looks like him, and on the back there's lots of music sort of related books that they can read and tick off, you know. And it was really, really fun to do. And then so we're doing that at the moment. So I'm sort of
that's great.
And lots of activity packs for schools and things like that.
Rob, it's been such an interesting time talking to you this morning. I really urge everyone to go and seek out Dinosaur Juniors as well as the rest of your books, to become familiar with those. And I know we can't wait to see the World Book Day campaign as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been lovely talking to you.